At my granddaughter's wedding, I noticed my name tag said, "The Absent Old Lady." The words were printed in elegant gold calligraphy, perfectly centered, carefully laminated, deliberate. I just smiled and pinned it to my navy silk dress. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. I'd like to know how far this story travels. The ballroom at the Westbrook Country Club shimmered under crystal chandeliers. White roses lined the aisle. Soft violin music floated through the air. Everything looked exactly as a wedding should look. Beautiful, polished, expensive. I had helped pay for most of it. The custom invitations. The live string quartet. The imported Italian cake flown in from Chicago. Even the hand-embroidered table linens. I told myself that was what grandmothers did. Family celebrations should be moments of joy. That's what I've always believed. I'm 72 years old. I've hosted more Thanksgiving dinners than I can count. I've ironed more little flower girl dresses than I remember. I've stood quietly in the background of photographs for decades. I never needed the spotlight. All I ever wanted was to belong. When Olivia got engaged last year, she cried in my kitchen, her head resting against my shoulder like she used to when she was 8 and afraid of thunderstorms. She told me she wanted something elegant but intimate, something meaningful. I wrote the first check that afternoon, not because anyone asked, because I loved her. So when I approached the reception desk and the young event coordinator handed me the name tag, I expected to see Margaret Whitmore, grandmother of the bride. Instead, I saw the absent old lady. For a moment, I thought it had to be a mistake, a printing error, a cruel joke from some exhausted intern who mixed up place cards. But then I looked up. Across the room, my daughter-in-law, Rebecca, was watching me, not smiling, observing, waiting. Her lips curved ever so slightly when she saw I had read it. And that's when I knew. This wasn't an accident. The photographer brushed past me. Guests laughed near the champagne tower. Somewhere behind me, someone whispered, "Is that her?" Another voice answered softly, "Yes. The one who lives out of state. Hardly ever comes around. I live 45 minutes away. 45. I've attended every recital, every graduation, every birthday, unless I was specifically told not to come. But perception is a fragile thing. It bends easily when someone keeps repeating a story long enough. Absent. That word lingered. Absent from what? The bridal shower I wasn't told about? The dress fitting scheduled last minute? The rehearsal dinner that, according to Rebecca, had limited seating? I had assumed scheduling conflicts, oversights, miscommunication. Standing there under the chandelier light, holding that laminated insult in my hand, I began to understand something far more uncomfortable. This was narrative, crafted, fed to others slowly. And tonight, it had been made public. A waiter approached with a tray of champagne. "Ma'am." I took a glass. My hand did not tremble. Rebecca floated toward me in a pale blush gown, diamond earrings catching the light. "Margaret," she said brightly, kissing the air near my cheek. "Isn't everything just perfect?" "Yes," I said calmly. "It's unforgettable." Her eyes flicked briefly to my name tag. "Oh," she added lightly. "Olivia thought it would be funny. You know how young people are." Olivia, my granddaughter. The child I once picked up from school every Wednesday for 7 straight years because Rebecca said she was too busy. The child whose college tuition I quietly covered when the investment account underperformed. Funny. I looked across the ballroom to where Olivia stood beside her new husband, glowing under soft lighting. She did not look at me. Not once. The string quartet began another melody. Applause rippled through the room as guests were guided toward their assigned tables. My seat was near the back, table 12, next to 2 distant cousins and the caterer's assistant. I sat down slowly, smoothing my dress. The gold letters on my chest gleamed under the lights. The absent old lady. I traced the edge of the card with my finger. Absent. No, I had been present. Present in hospital waiting rooms. Present at ballet recitals. Present when Rebecca needed a co-signer. Present when Olivia needed a laptop. Present when the mortgage payment ran short. What I had been absent from was control of the story. And that, I realized, was the real issue. As guests took their seats, I overheard fragments of conversation drifting through the air. Rebecca said Margaret prefers her privacy. Apparently she travels a lot. I heard she wasn't very involved growing up. Interesting. I have not left the state in 4 years. But again, repetition becomes truth when no one challenges it. I sipped my champagne. I did not confront anyone. I did not remove the tag. I let it remain there, visible, because sometimes the best way to understand the depth of disrespect is to allow it to fully unfold. As the maid of honor raised her glass for the first toast, I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not humiliation, clarity. This wasn't about a name tag. It was about positioning. If I was absent, then perhaps I was unnecessary. And if I was unnecessary, then perhaps they believed something else too. That I would not notice. That I would not question. That I would continue signing checks without asking why my presence was quietly erased from every meaningful moment. The applause erupted after the toast. I joined in politely. Rebecca glanced toward me again, still measuring my reaction, still waiting for embarrassment. I smiled back, slowly, deliberately, because what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 2 weeks earlier, during a routine meeting with my late husband's attorney, I had updated something important. And if tonight had proven anything, it was that I had updated it just in time. I adjusted the name tag once more, making sure it was straight. The absent old lady. No, I was very much present. And by the end of this celebration, everyone would understand exactly how present I truly was. The dinner plates were porcelain, white with a thin rim of gold. I recognized them immediately. I had chosen them. Rebecca had sent me 3 options months ago. Which one feels timeless? She'd asked. I told her the gold rim would photograph beautifully under candlelight. She had agreed. Now the same gold rim framed a room where my name had been quietly rewritten. The salad course arrived. Arugula, shaved Parmesan, something drizzled carefully over the top. The kind of food meant to look effortless but calculated down to the last detail. Across the room, Rebecca leaned toward a cluster of guests, laughing softly. She had a talent for tone, never loud, never crude. Just persuasive enough to make her version of events sound reasonable. I watched as she rested her hand lightly on Olivia's shoulder. A subtle gesture. Ownership disguised as affection. At my table, one of the distant cousins cleared her throat. "So you must be Margaret," she said, glancing at my name. Tag. "We've heard you prefer to keep to yourself." Prefer. Such a gentle word for exclusion. "I suppose I value quiet," I replied calmly. Which was true. What I didn't value was erasure. The band began playing something softer as the main course was served. Steak for most. Salmon for others. I had indicated salmon on the RSVP card. Instead, a vegetarian plate was set before me. "I'm sorry," the server whispered. "We were told you had dietary restrictions." "I don't." Another small detail. Another quiet adjustment. I thanked him anyway. From the head table, I caught fragments of conversation carried by the microphone between speeches. Rebecca's brother joked about modern families and how some relatives only show up when it's convenient. Laughter followed. I didn't need to look down to know the gold letters were still visible on my chest. Absent. It was a clever strategy, really. Not a dramatic confrontation. Not an explosive argument. Just a steady repositioning over time. Fewer invitations. Less information. Subtle comments repeated often enough to sound factual. Until eventually, the story becomes accepted. I took a sip of water and let my eyes move across the ballroom. 42 guests. Nearly all of them had, at some point in the past year, thanked me privately for making this possible. Tonight, no one mentioned it. Not during the father of the bride speech. Not during the slideshow of childhood photos. Not once. Olivia thanked her parents, her in-laws, her friends. She did not thank me. And that told me more than the name tag ever could. For years, I had assumed these small oversights were accidents, miscommunications, generational misunderstandings. But as I sat there in that softly lit ballroom, something aligned. The missed invitations. The rehearsal dinner I was too tired to attend. The bridal brunch that filled up quickly. The narrative of distance that never came from my mouth. It wasn't carelessness. It was consistency. And consistency reveals intention. I folded my napkin carefully beside my untouched plate. Rebecca caught my eye from across the room again. Still watching. Still assessing whether the humiliation had landed. I smiled at her once more. Not because I was unhurt, but because I had finally stopped being confused. And clarity, at my age, is far more powerful than outrage. The speeches continued. Laughter rose and fell in careful waves. Glasses clinked. Cameras flashed. Every moment was being documented from the right angles. Then Rebecca stepped toward the microphone. She adjusted it slightly, smiled at the crowd, and waited just long enough for the room to quiet. "If you all look at your name tags," she said playfully, "you'll see we added a little personality to each one. Just something fun to describe how we know the bride." A ripple of amused murmurs moved through the ballroom. My fingers rested lightly against the edge of mine. Personality. At the front, a college friend read hers aloud. "Dance floor queen." More laughter. An uncle announced his said, "family historian." Applause. Rebecca tilted her head slightly and added, "It's just a light-hearted way to celebrate everyone's role." Everyone's role. I felt something settle in my chest. Not shock this time, but confirmation. Because now it was clear. This wasn't a private oversight. It was curated. Table by table, guests began reading theirs aloud. The practical one. The travel buddy. The childhood neighbor. Each label was affectionate. Harmless. Warm. Until a voice from the adjacent table leaned toward me and asked, softly but audibly, "So, what does yours say?" There it was. The moment. I could have turned it face down. I could have brushed it off. Instead, I lifted it slightly so she could see. Her smile froze. "Oh," she said, quickly looking away. "I'm sure that's just you know." Yes, I knew. Across the room, Rebecca watched again. Waiting. Testing. From the microphone, she continued. "And of course," she said sweetly, "we couldn't forget our beloved family members who are fashionably absent most of the time." A few scattered chuckles followed. Not loud, but enough. She didn't say my name. She didn't need to. The implication had already been planted. I felt the shift in the air around my table. Subtle. Social. The kind of discomfort people don't know how to address, so they pretend not to notice. One of the cousins cleared his throat and reached for his wine. The caterer's assistant suddenly found the bread basket fascinating. No one defended me. No one asked a question. And that was the clearest answer of all. For years, I had assumed my place in this family was secure because of history, because of blood, because of sacrifice. But roles can be rewritten quietly, especially when the person being rewritten stays polite. I thought about the mortgage payment I had covered 3 winters ago, when my son's business hit a rough patch. I thought about the emergency dental bill for Olivia when she was 16. I thought about the rehearsal dinner I wasn't invited to because seating was limited. Absent. No, I had been strategically repositioned. Rebecca ended her speech with a toast to new beginnings and chosen family. Chosen. An interesting word. Applause filled the room again. I clapped with everyone else. Steady. Composed. Because something inside me had shifted from hurt to awareness. This was no longer about feelings. It was about leverage. And for the first time that evening, I stopped wondering whether this had been intentional. It was. And if tonight was their performance, then perhaps it was time I stopped being part of the audience. After Rebecca's toast, the music grew louder. The lights dimmed slightly as the couple moved toward the center of the dance floor. Applause followed them like a curtain closing on a well-rehearsed act. I remained seated. The gold letters on my chest felt heavier now, though the card itself weighed almost nothing. Absent. It's strange how a single word can unlock years of memory. As I watched Olivia sway under the chandelier light, I found myself drifting backward. Not to tonight. To the first time I felt gently moved aside. It was her high school graduation. I arrived early, carrying a small bouquet of white lilies. Rebecca met me at the entrance and said seating was very tight, but she'd save me a spot near the back so I wouldn't have to deal with the crowd. I had believed her. Later, I saw photos on social media. The front row was full of extended friends, neighbors, a Pilates instructor. I told myself I was overthinking. Then there was Thanksgiving 3 years ago. Rebecca insisted they were keeping it small and simple. She suggested I relax at home and not worry about cooking. That evening, I saw pictures online of 20 people around their dining table. Candles, turkey, laughter. I reheated soup alone. Still, I told myself families evolve. Traditions shift. Young people build their own rhythms. I did not want to be the difficult one. I never wanted to be the grandmother who complains. When my son, Daniel, mentioned refinancing the house during a tight financial season, I co-signed without hesitation. "We'll pay you back as soon as things stabilize," he said. They did. But what lingered wasn't the money. It was how naturally the responsibility flowed in one direction. From me to them. Always forward. Never back. I remembered Olivia calling me her backup plan once, laughing as she said it. "Grandma always saves the day." I had smiled. I thought it was affection. Tonight, sitting at table 12, I began to understand the difference between being appreciated and being positioned. The rehearsal dinner I hadn't attended? I later learned the seating chart had space. The bridal shower invitation that must have been lost in the mail? It had never been sent. The Christmas where they claimed they were traveling out of town? They had hosted friends instead. Each moment alone could be explained. Together, they formed something else. A design. And what struck me most wasn't cruelty. It was consistency. Rebecca didn't explode. She didn't insult me outright. She adjusted perception slowly. She fed small narratives to others. Margaret prefers privacy. Margaret doesn't like crowds. Margaret lives far away. Margaret doesn't stay long. Until eventually, Margaret becomes absent. Not physically, socially, emotionally, publicly. I watched Daniel from across the room as he laughed with his in-laws. He hadn't looked toward me once during the speeches. Was he aware? Or had he simply absorbed the version of events presented to him over time? When someone repeats something often enough, even decent people stop questioning it. The music swelled as Olivia and her husband finished their first dance. Guests rose to join them. I remained seated for a moment longer. Not frozen. Not wounded. Thinking. Because tonight was no longer about a joke on a name tag. It was about how easily I had allowed myself to be edited out of my own family story. And I had just decided that the editing was over. I eventually stood and made my way toward the edge of the dance floor. Not to join, just to observe. Couples swayed under soft amber lights. Laughter floated easily now that the formalities were over. Champagne continued to circulate. The atmosphere looked effortless again. That's the thing about public humiliation. It blends quickly into celebration. As I reached for a glass of water near the bar, a small hand slipped into mine. Grandma. It was Lily, Olivia's younger cousin. 19 years old. Quiet. Observant. The kind of girl who listens more than she speaks. She glanced at my name. Tag. Then back up at my face. That's not funny, she said softly. Just 4 words. No performance. No whispering to others. No nervous laugh. Just truth. I felt something warm press briefly against the cool clarity inside me. You don't have to stay if you don't want to, she added. I studied her expression. Concern. Not pity. There's a difference. I'm all right, I said gently. Are you enjoying yourself? She hesitated. I guess. It's just, people keep saying things that aren't true. I didn't ask which things. I already knew. Lily lowered her voice. Aunt Rebecca told some of my friends that you didn't want to be involved in the wedding planning. That you thought it was too much work. Too much work. I had reviewed contracts. Compared caterers. Wired deposits. I see, I replied calmly. And she said you prefer not to be photographed. That's why you're not in most of the pictures from the engagement party. The engagement party I learned about from Facebook. Lily shifted slightly closer. I didn't think that sounded like you. There it was again. Perception versus reality. It only takes one person to quietly question a narrative for the illusion to weaken. Thank you, I said. She squeezed my hand once before returning to the dance floor. I remained by the bar, letting the information settle. Rebecca hadn't just repositioned me socially. She had built justification. If I was absent, it wasn't neglect. It was preference. If I wasn't involved, it wasn't exclusion. It was choice. That's how you make manipulation look considerate. I watched Rebecca across the room as she laughed with a group of guests. Confident. Relaxed. Completely certain her version of the story was intact. But she hadn't accounted for Lily. Or perhaps she hadn't considered that someone young might notice inconsistencies adults ignore. A few minutes later, Daniel approached me for the first time that evening. Mom, he said, adjusting his tie slightly. You doing okay? His tone was casual. Not concerned. Just procedural. I'm fine, I answered. He glanced briefly at my name tag, then away again. They were just trying to be playful, he said lightly. Don't read into it. Playful. That word again. I looked at my son, really looked at him. Did he believe that? Or was it simply easier than confronting what had been allowed to happen? I'm not reading into anything, I said. Evenly. I'm observing. He gave a short nod, as if the conversation were complete. And perhaps, for him, it was. But for me, something had just shifted permanently. Because when even the quietest person in the room can see the distortion, the narrative is no longer stable. And Rebecca had just made her first mistake. She underestimated who was paying attention. The dancing grew louder as the evening settled into celebration. Shoes were kicked off. Jackets removed. The formal version of the night began to loosen into something more chaotic and comfortable. I remained composed. When you reach my age, you learn something important. You don't confront chaos in the middle of music. You wait. I checked my watch. 9:42 p.m. Rebecca was busy greeting guests near the photo booth, making sure she appeared in every important frame. Daniel was laughing with his father-in-law at the open bar. Olivia was surrounded by friends, glowing under the warm lights. No one was watching me anymore. Perfect. I walked slowly toward the reception desk where the event coordinator stood reviewing invoices on a tablet. "Excuse me," I said gently. She looked up, polite and slightly flustered. "Yes, ma'am. I just wanted to confirm something," I continued calmly. "The final vendor payments. Have they all been processed through the original account?" She hesitated. Yes, I believe so. Everything was wired last week from the account on file." "My account?" I asked softly. She glanced down at her screen. "Yes, Mrs. Whitmore. The remaining balance cleared yesterday morning." "Yesterday morning. Interesting. So the final payment, made from my account, had been completed less than 24 hours before this reception. And yet tonight, I was absent." "Thank you," I said, smiling politely. That's all I needed to know. I walked away without another word. Not angry, not shaking, just certain, because this wasn't about hurt feelings anymore. It was about structure. Rebecca had built a social narrative. But financially, the foundation still ran through me. I returned to table 12 and picked up my clutch. Inside it, alongside lipstick and tissues, was a folded copy of a document I had signed 2 weeks earlier. An updated trust amendment. Not dramatic, not explosive, just precise. I hadn't made that change because of tonight. I had made it because of a conversation I'd had with my attorney about long-term clarity. But now, sitting under crystal chandeliers while guests toasted, a future built partially on my generosity, I understood something clearly. Gratitude fades. Paperwork doesn't. Rebecca believed she controlled perception, but she had never asked herself a very simple question. Who controls access? Access to what? Funding. Assets. Legacy. I watched her laugh again across the room, completely at ease. She thought the name tag was the final word. She thought tonight sealed the story. But what she didn't realize was this. Narratives live in public. Consequences live in private. The music shifted into something louder. Younger guests flooded the dance floor. Daniel passed by my table again. "Heading out soon?" he asked casually. "Not yet," I replied. Because there was one more thing I wanted to observe. I wanted to see who approached me before the night ended. Who thanked me, who avoided eye contact, who believed the story, and who quietly doubted it. You learn a great deal about people when they think the power dynamic is settled. Rebecca believed it was. She believed I would leave quietly, embarrassed, repositioned, reduced. Instead, I sat back down, smoothed my dress, and adjusted the gold card on my chest one final time. The absent old lady. No, tonight was simply the moment I stopped being generous without boundaries. And the moment I began being deliberate. By 10:30, the reception had shifted fully into noise. The older guests began gathering their coats. The younger crowd claimed the center of the dance floor. Laughter grew louder, less careful. Formal smiles softened into flushed cheeks and loosened ties. I remained at table 12, not because I felt unwelcome, but because I was studying something. Patterns reveal themselves at the end of events. When people think the important part is over. A few guests approached me on their way out. A distant aunt leaned down slightly and said, "It was lovely to see you, even if you're absent." She laughed awkwardly, as if trying to smooth over something she didn't want to confront. "I'm glad you came," I replied. She didn't correct the label. She didn't question it. She simply accepted it as part of the evening's theme. Then one of Daniel's business associates shook my hand. "You must be proud," he said politely. "Rebecca mentioned you prefer staying out of the spotlight." Prefer. Again. Interesting how often that word appeared. "I prefer accuracy," I answered gently. He blinked, unsure how to respond, then excused himself. Across the room, I noticed something else. Rebecca was circulating intentionally, touching arms, laughing, leaning in to speak softly. She was reinforcing relationships, strengthening the version of events that placed her at the center. I watched Daniel closely. He hadn't approached me again. Not to ask about the name tag. Not to ask if I was comfortable. Not to thank me. And that silence told me more than confrontation ever could. When a narrative benefits someone, they rarely challenge it. Near the dessert table, Olivia finally made eye contact with me. Just briefly. There was something there. Uncertainty, perhaps. Or guilt. It flickered, then disappeared as Rebecca called her back toward a group of friends for photographs. That was the moment I understood something important. This wasn't about a cruel joke. It was about alignment. Who stood beside whom? Who spoke for whom? Who allowed what to continue? For years, I had filled gaps quietly. Financial gaps. Emotional gaps. Logistical gaps. But tonight, the gaps had become visible. And instead of scrambling to fill them again, I chose to let them remain. Daniel eventually returned to my table, coat over his arm. "We're heading to the after-party," he said. "You probably wouldn't enjoy it." "Probably." I smiled. "You're right," I said calmly. He hesitated for half a second, as if waiting for something more. An objection. A complaint. A request to be included. I gave him none. "Drive safely," I added. He nodded and walked away. And just like that, the next layer of the evening revealed itself. Not once did he ask if I needed a ride. Not once did he ask if I wanted to join. Not once did he say thank you. When people believe you'll always remain, they stop securing your presence. I stood slowly, smoothing my dress one final time. The name tag still gleamed under the dimmed lights. I didn't remove it. Not yet. Because tonight had served a purpose. It had shown me exactly where I stood. And more importantly, exactly where I no longer would. I left the ballroom just before 11. No announcement. No dramatic exit. Just a quiet walk past the reception desk, past the flickering candles, past the framed seating chart with my name printed neatly under table 12. Outside, the air was cool. The country club parking lot shimmered under tall lamps. Music still thumped faintly through the closed doors behind me, but out here, everything was still. I stood beside my car for a moment before unlocking it. 72 years of life teaches you this. Never drive while your thoughts are unsettled. I removed the name tag slowly. The absent old lady. I turned it over in my hand. The adhesive was strong. Professionally printed. Not a last-minute joke. Planned. I placed it carefully inside my clutch instead of throwing it away. Evidence matters. On the drive home, I replayed the evening. Not emotionally, but strategically. The speech. The public reinforcement. Daniel's silence. Olivia's avoidance. Lily's quiet honesty. It wasn't chaos. It was alignment. Rebecca had built a narrative where I was distant by choice. Daniel had accepted it because it required less effort than challenging it. Olivia had grown up inside it. And the extended family? They simply followed the loudest version of events. This wasn't cruelty in the explosive sense. It was erasure by repetition. When I pulled into my driveway, the house was dark and steady, just as I'd left it. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. No music. No applause. No curated smiles. Just quiet. I set my clutch on the kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of water. Then I did something very simple. I walked to my home office. The lamp cast a warm circle of light over the desk. Inside the top drawer sat a folder labeled Whitmore Family Trust. 2 weeks ago, I had met with Mr. Halpern, my late husband's attorney, for what I told Daniel was routine paperwork. It hadn't been routine. It had been preventative. I sat down slowly and opened the folder. The amended document lay neatly clipped together. Clear language. Clean terms. No emotion. Just structure. I traced one paragraph lightly with my finger. It addressed conduct. Public disparagement. Intentional exclusion. Misrepresentation of relationship for financial benefit. Legal language is fascinating. It does not shout. It does not accuse. It defines. Rebecca believed tonight defined me. But the truth was, I had already redefined something far more permanent. My phone buzzed softly on the desk. A text from Daniel. "Hope you got home safe." That was all. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just maintenance. I typed back. I did. The wedding was memorable. 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. No reply. I closed the folder carefully and returned it to the drawer. Tonight hadn't hurt me the way Rebecca expected. It clarified me. There is a difference. I turned off the office lamp and stood in the quiet hallway of my home. Absent? No. I had been present. Present long enough to see the full picture. And tomorrow morning, I would make the first call that ensured I would never again be reduced to a decorative role in someone else's celebration. I woke up early the next morning. Not because I couldn't sleep, but because clarity doesn't wait. The house was quiet, washed in soft gray light from the kitchen window. I brewed coffee the same way I always do. 2 scoops, steady pour, no rush. Routine is grounding. Last night had been emotional in appearance. But this morning? It was procedural. At exactly 8:30 a.m., I sat at my desk and picked up the phone. Halpern and Associates. The receptionist answered. This is Margaret Whitmore, I said evenly. I'd like to confirm a few details regarding the amendment we finalized 2 weeks ago. There was a brief pause. Then the familiar voice of Mr. Halpern came on the line. Good morning, Margaret. Everything all right? Yes, I replied. Better than all right. I just want to ensure the distribution clauses are fully active. They are, he said. The revisions were notarized and filed. The conduct provisions are enforceable as written. Conduct provisions. Such a clean phrase. I'd also like to initiate the secondary safeguard, I added. A slight silence. You're certain? He asked carefully. I am. What we had added was simple. Any direct descendant who publicly misrepresented their relationship with me for financial leverage or intentionally excluded me from significant family events while benefiting from trust assets would trigger a review. A review that could redirect distributions. Not to punish, but to protect. Understood, he said. I'll draft the formal notice. Would you like it sent this week? Yes. No tremor in my voice. No hesitation. After the call ended, I leaned back in my chair and allowed myself one slow breath. This wasn't revenge. It was correction. There's a difference. My phone buzzed again. A group message from the wedding party. Photos from the after party. Rebecca front and center in most of them. Daniel smiling broadly. Olivia radiant. Under one photo, someone had commented, family complete. Complete. Interesting. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and reviewed the final wire transfers from my account to the wedding vendors. Every receipt was timestamped. Every payment traceable. I saved copies into a separate folder. Documentation is power when perception fails. Around noon, Lily sent me a private message. Grandma, I just wanted you to know, some of us see what's happening. Some of us. Not all. But enough. I typed back. Thank you for paying attention. Because attention changes outcomes. Rebecca believed last night was the closing chapter. She believed the narrative was sealed. But narratives depend on access. And access, in this family, still ran through me. By afternoon, Mr. Halpern emailed a draft of the formal notice. Polite. Professional. Clear. It didn't accuse anyone by name. It simply reminded all beneficiaries of the behavioral standards attached to continued trust participation. I read it once, then twice, then approved it. Because I had finally understood something essential. If someone labels you absent, the most powerful response is not argument. It is recalibration. And Rebecca was about to discover that erasing someone from a photograph is much easier than erasing them from a contract. The formal notice was sent on Tuesday morning at 9:03 a.m. Professional header. Clean formatting. No emotion. By 9:17, my phone rang. Rebecca. I let it ring twice before answering. Margaret, she said, her voice tight but controlled. I just received something from your attorney. I assumed you would. I replied calmly. There was a pause. I'm not sure I understand the implication, she continued. It sounds like a warning. It's not a warning, I said evenly. It's a clarification. Another pause. Longer this time. Daniel's voice came faintly through the speaker, asking something in the background. Rebecca lowered her tone. Are you suggesting we've done something inappropriate? I didn't raise mine. I'm suggesting, I said, that public misrepresentation of a beneficiary relationship can have legal consequences. Silence. The kind that reveals more than words. We've never misrepresented anything, she said carefully. Good, I replied. Then the notice shouldn't concern you. That ended the first call. 10 minutes later, Daniel called separately. Mom, he began, skipping pleasantries. What is this about? It's about structure, I answered. And expectations. You think we're excluding you? He asked, a note of disbelief slipping in. I don't think, I said gently. I observe. He exhaled sharply. The name tag was a joke. I didn't mention the name tag. Another silence. Rebecca is upset, he said. I'm sure she is. Do you really intend to tie family relationships to financial clauses? He asked. I leaned back in my chair. No, I corrected softly. I intend to tie financial participation to respectful conduct. There's a difference. He didn't argue immediately. That told me he understood. Mom, he said finally, you're overreacting. No, I replied. I reacted proportionally, quietly, legally. When people expect tears and receive paperwork instead, they become unsettled. By noon, 3 additional beneficiaries had forwarded the notice to me with polite messages, just confirming we're all in good standing. Interesting how quickly attention sharpens when assets are involved. By early afternoon, Rebecca sent a longer message. We never intended to hurt you. The wedding was stressful. Things get misinterpreted. Surely we can resolve this privately. Privately. That word stood out. The humiliation had been public. The correction, however, was precise. I responded simply, there is nothing to resolve. The trust terms apply equally to everyone. No accusation. No lecture. Just equality. That evening, Olivia called. Her voice was softer than I'd heard it in months. Grandma, did I do something wrong? There it was. Not anger. Not defense. Uncertainty. Have you ever felt I was absent? I asked gently. She hesitated. No, she admitted quietly. Then perhaps it's time we both consider why others might benefit from that perception. Silence on the line. Because this wasn't about punishing a wedding. It was about dismantling a narrative. And Rebecca had just discovered something she hadn't anticipated. Control in a ballroom is temporary. Control in a legal document is not. And for the first time since Saturday night, the balance had shifted. By Thursday evening, the tone had changed. Not publicly, not on social media, but privately. Daniel asked if he could stop by. Alone. That detail mattered. He arrived just after 6, still in his work jacket, shoulders tighter than usual. I invited him into the kitchen. The same kitchen where Olivia once cried over a broken bracelet. The same table where I had written checks without hesitation. He didn't sit immediately. Mom, he began. Rebecca feels blindsided. I poured tea slowly. Blindsided implies surprise. She didn't think the name tag would escalate to this, he said. I looked at him carefully. It didn't escalate, I replied. It revealed. He finally sat down. We didn't mean to make you look distant. Did you correct it? I asked. He hesitated. That was enough. When people heard I was absent, I continued evenly. Did anyone say otherwise? Silence. Because silence is participation. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. Rebecca thought you preferred space. Did you? Another pause. No, he admitted quietly. There it was. Not accusation. Acknowledgement. I've never asked to be centered, I said. Only accurately represented. He nodded slowly, absorbing that. The trust notice, he added carefully, has everyone nervous. Good, I said calmly. His eyes lifted slightly at that. Nervous people read carefully. This wasn't about punishment. It was about attention. For years, I had relied on history to secure my place in this family. Now, structure would do it instead. Rebecca feels like you're threatening her, Daniel said. I am threatening behavior, I corrected. Not her. There's a difference. He exhaled, leaning back. Are you planning to cut us out? He asked. No, I said. I'm planning to remain present. And that is what unsettled him most. Because presence, when defined legally, cannot be rewritten casually. After he left, Rebecca did not call. But the next morning, something subtle happened. A group email arrived from her. Subject line, Family Appreciation. In it, she thanked everyone who made the wedding possible, and included a specific line, and a special thank you to Margaret for her generosity and unwavering support. Public. Clear. Corrective. Interesting how quickly accuracy appears when consequences exist. Later that afternoon, Olivia sent me a photo from the ceremony. One I hadn't seen before. In it, I was standing near the aisle before guests arrived. Adjusting a floral arrangement. Working. Present. She added a simple message. I don't know how this got left out. But it shouldn't have. Left out. Yes. Not absent. Edited. That distinction mattered. I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence settle. Because power does not rush to validate itself. That evening, I opened the trust document again. Not to revise. Just to confirm. Clarity felt steady. The name tag still rested in my desk drawer. I hadn't thrown it away. I didn't need to. It had already served its purpose. Rebecca believed a ballroom defined perception. I knew something stronger did. When access becomes conditional, respect becomes consistent. And for the first time in years, the room had grown quiet in my favor. A week after the wedding, Olivia asked if she could come by. Alone. I said yes. She arrived without Makeup, without ceremony, without Rebecca. Just Olivia. She stood in my living room, holding her phone in both hands like she wasn't sure where to put them. I didn't know about the name tag until the rehearsal, she said quietly. Mom said it was just a theme, that everyone had something playful. I waited. I didn't think it would land like that, she added. Land. Such a soft word for something so deliberate. Did you think I was absent? I asked gently. She looked up at me immediately. No, not defensive. Not rehearsed. Just honest. I nodded once. That's all that matters. She swallowed. I should have corrected it. Yes, I said calmly. You should have. There was no anger in my voice. Just fact. She stepped closer. Grandma, are you going to change the trust? There it was. Not about feelings. About consequences. I already did, I answered. Her eyes widened slightly. Not to remove anyone, I continued. To define expectations. She stood quietly, absorbing that. For years, I said softly, I believed love alone secured my place in this family. I've learned something important. She listened carefully now. Love sustains relationships, but structure protects them. Silence settled between us. Not heavy, but real. I never wanted to be in the spotlight, I continued. I never needed applause. I simply needed accuracy. She nodded slowly. I'll fix it, she said. You can't fix perception overnight, I replied. But you can stop participating in distortion. That was the lesson. Not confrontation. Not revenge. Alignment. Before she left, I walked to my office and opened the drawer. The name tag rested exactly where I had placed it. The absent old lady. I handed it to her. This belongs to you, I said. She stared at it. I don't want it, she whispered. Neither did I. She folded it carefully and placed it in her purse. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. After she left, I stood alone in the quiet hallway of my home. The house felt steady, grounded, present. Daniel and Rebecca have been different since the notice. Polite, measured, intentional. Respect, I've learned, grows quickly when accountability is clear. I was never absent. I was edited. And the moment I stopped arguing with the narrative and started redefining the terms, the story corrected itself. Family doesn't require perfection. It requires boundaries. And now, when I attend gatherings, my name tag reads simply, Margaret Whitmore grandmother. No adjectives. No disclaimers. Just truth. Because I am not an accessory to someone else's celebration. I am not a checkbook in a silk dress. And I am certainly not absent. I am present. By choice. And by design.